The NASCAR playoffs deliver on drama yet again. Kyle Larson goes from possibly out of the playoff, shockingly, to victory lane. Meanwhile, Kevin Harvick gets a shot in on Chase Elliott, but Chase Elliott gets the last lap in the end. We've got so much to talk about after the Roval. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. On the go, as you can see, I'm visiting some family this weekend, but luckily I had the afternoon free to watch all of the action from the Charlotte Roval. That's what we're going to talk about here today. But first, this episode is sponsored by Alka Seltzer. Alka Seltzer starts neutralizing acid in seconds for heartburn relief. It's also perfect to combat indigestion or an upset stomach. It's available at Walmarts everywhere, so be sure to pick up some Alka Seltzer the next time you're not feeling 100%. Again, Alka Seltzer available at Walmart, sponsors of this episode of Out of the Groove. I don't know why, but for some reason, every year, the Charlotte Roval plays out like a storybook. They all seem to have a clear beginning, middle, and end, with exciting events happening throughout, crescendoing slowly towards the climax at the very end of the story, or in our case, the end of the race. You know, whether it's 2019 when Chase Elliott, of course, the favorite, the fan favorite, the race favorite, goes head on into the wall, makes a mistake, owns up to it. The hero of the story punched down, and then in the closing laps, he rebounded and rallied to somehow shockingly win in 2019. 2018's race, of course, had a crazy finish. It was more of a tragedy, honestly. Two aging heroes, Martin Truex Jr. and Jimmy Johnson, battling for the win in the closing laps, only for the 7-time champion to fall from grace, cause a wreck, and let the youngster, the young up-and-coming star, Ryan Blaney, steal the victory. This year's race at the Roval was no different. It played out like a story. There was a clear hero, there was a clear villain. There were moments of turmoil and concern throughout the early portions of the race. One driver rose to the occasion to grab his 7th victory of the season. This race played out like a Hollywood story. We're going to talk about all of the details, including the Harvick versus Chase Elliott rivalry. We'll look at the top finishers. We'll talk about the playoff grid as points now reset for the round of 8. We'll put this race on the groovy gauge at the end, but I want to begin this episode by talking about Kyle Larson and giving that entire number 5 Hendrick Motorsports teams their well-deserved props. The 5 team has been the best team all around this season. They've got the most wins, 6 wins coming into this race. They've stacked the most playoff points, and this round hadn't gone very well. They were okay at Las Vegas, but not as competitive as most people thought they'd be. They finished 10th. Then early in the Talladega race last weekend, got caught up in somebody else's mess and finished 37th. They relied heavily on those playoff points they amassed during the regular season to still be in a good spot today, but early in this race, they had electrical issues. The battery was dying, the alternator needed to be repaired, and actually they weren't the only ones. Their teammate, Alex Bowman, was in the same boat, but Kyle Larson's team, led by Cliff Daniels, were able to get the issue fixed, didn't go any laps down. Their car was fast, their driver we know is incredibly talented, and so throughout the second half of this race, they rallied and ended up winning this race. This is one of the, if not the most impressive wins I've seen from Kyle Larson all season long, and that's saying something because he's had some impressive dominating wins. Nashville Super Speedway earlier this year, for example, or Las Vegas in just his 3rd race with Hendrick Motorsports. He's had impressive runs this year. That whole team has, but today was near at the very top of the list. The adversity they faced, even Larson mentioned in his post-race interview that he knew, at least at some point during stage 2, with all the issues they were having, all the track position they had lost, that for at least a brief moment, they were below the cut line. Kyle Larson, the 5 team, so dominant this season, they were below the cut line, they battled back, fixed the issues, and went on to win the race. They could have just run top 10, top 15 and just, stayed on the lead lap, avoided catastrophe, but no, they went out, went the extra mile, and won yet again. So props to Kyle Larson, Cliff Daniels, the entire 5 team. They deserve it. Kyle Larson stole the show at the end of the race, but let's be honest, the show today was once again Kevin Harvick and Chase Elliott. Now, I'm not going to go back and recap for like the 12th time now the entire incident. I did a whole video on it like 2 weeks ago, so I'm not going to do that again. But to summarize, the week after Bristol, Kevin Harvick, the 45-year-old veteran driver, was clearly still rattled about the whole incident. He had not moved on. He was still visibly frustrated, visibly upset, annoyed, still throwing shots at Chase Elliott. Oh, he's like a 9-year-old. Meanwhile, Chase Elliott, 20 years younger than Kevin Harvick. Both are NASCAR champions, so they have that accolade to their credit. But Chase Elliott, meanwhile, the week after Bristol, was much more composed. He'd seemed to moved on. He spoke like a driver who was looking towards the future, who said, that's in the past, there's nothing we can go back to change it now. His focus was still out front on winning his 2nd straight NASCAR Cup Series championship, and I commended Chase Elliott incredibly for the emotional maturity he was able to show. And that was despite, from my perspective at least, Chase Elliott getting the far worse deal at Bristol. Remember, both Both drivers were battling for the win. Kevin Harvick tried to pinch Chase Elliott behind a lap car. Chase threw it in there 3 wide. Harvick had already committed to sliding up the track. He slid up and cut Chase Elliott's left side tire down. Chase Elliott's the one who finished 25th. Elliott came back out on the track, slowed Harvick down a little bit so that Kyle Larson, Elliott's teammate, could get by. Kevin Harvick still ended up finishing 2nd place, and both drivers moved on and were still in the playoffs after that. Yet a week later, Elliott seemed much more composed, much more moved on than Kevin Harvick. Well, we hadn't talked much about that rivalry the last couple of weeks, but today, Kevin Harvick, seemingly out of the blue, brought that rivalry, that dispute, back into everyone's focus. Middle portion of this race, Kevin Harvick intentionally wrecked Chase Elliott. It was clear he pretty much admitted to it afterwards. They were still on the slow infield portion of the track, but they were getting ready to go back up onto the banking, so Harvick took this opportunity to send Chase Elliott into the outside wall completely, or at least at first it seemed to completely destroy the rear end of Chase Elliott's car, but they put as many band-aids on it as they possibly could, and Chase Elliott was still able to run very competitive laps afterwards. But now Chase Elliott, who only came into this race +9, was well below the cut line. He needed not only his teammate William Byron to start struggling, but he needed Kevin Harvick to have issues as well. And NBC played the radio transmission between Elliott and his spotter, crew chief. They were basically telling him to go wreck Kevin Harvick so that they can still make the playoffs, which I do not condone in the slightest. I gave Chase Elliott a lot of credit a few weeks ago for the emotional composure he showed, and granted, he was dealt a pretty gnarly blow today by Kevin Harvick just out of left field deciding to wreck him. Harvick was completely wrong for that. There's no way, you cannot convince me that Chase Elliott running a little slowly at Bristol to kind of take Kevin Harvick's line away justifies Harvick completely wrecking Chase Elliott, attempting to wreck Chase Elliott out of the playoffs. That's what Kevin Harvick, I think he thought he succeeded at doing in this race. Those two are not equal at all, especially when you consider Kevin Harvick hit Chase Elliott and cut his tire down first, so Kevin Harvick was completely out of line today, wrecking Chase Elliott. But all that being said, the radio communication between Eddie DeHaan and Alan Gusman and Chase Elliott, where they said, hey, go wreck him, I do not condone that. We should not have drivers going out there and just blatantly taking each other out, especially late in the season when points are as important as they are. So obviously they never went out and did wreck Kevin Harvick. They never did it. They never acted on it. But the fact that it was even being discussed, I know emotions were high, tensions were high, that kind of stuff, NASCAR should at least talk to them. That's not a penalty. Shouldn't be a penalty for just talking about doing something, but it should absolutely be addressed. But anyway, fast forward to the very end of the race. Chase Elliott had rebounded nicely. Like I said, they still had good speed in that car. He drove through the field because he is a freaking god on road courses, especially the Charlotte Roval, where he'd won the most recent 2 races. He drove back up into the top 20, up around the top 15. He closed in on Kevin Harvick for position late in this race. And at that point, at that time, both drivers seemed to be pretty safe. William Byron had lost the lead. He was back around 3rd, 4th, 5th place and on a slightly different tire strategy than some of those around him. Harvick and Elliott were both in decent, not great, but decent positions. It looked like they were both possibly going to move on until Chase Elliott straight up intimidated the hell out of Kevin Harvick. I cannot believe what I witnessed today. I honestly don't know how Kevin Harvick comes back from this. Like, you saw his post-race interview on NBCSN. He looked shook. He looked rattled. He didn't know what to say. He was trying to come up with a snappy comeback. Oh, you remember what happened at Bristol? He deserved it. But he couldn't do it. He couldn't muster it. His interview made no sense. He was unable to form rational, complete sentences. He was rattled because he got clowned by Chase Elliott, the driver that he equated to a 9-year-old just a couple weeks ago. Kevin Harvick, it felt like I was watching The Walking Dead. Chase Elliott caught himself a body and he didn't have to lay a fender on Kevin Harvick. Going through the front stretch, going into that, turn 1 that's now not Tums anymore, it's the DeWalt tough turn or something. You heard it on Kevin Harvick's radio that they played over NBCSN. His spotter was saying, hey, the 9's behind you, 9's behind, and Harvick just went straight. Controller disconnected, that whole meme. Harvick locked up the left front tire, drove it in too deep because he was worried about the 9 car, a couple car lengths behind him, and wrecked himself straight into the outside wall. I smiled. I'm not a big Chase Elliott fan, but Kevin Harvick was the villain of today's story. Going back to what I said, today's race played out like a Hollywood movie. Kevin Harvick was the clear Bond villain, and Chase Elliott was 007 out there getting the last laugh. I'm just making that reference because Daniel Craig waved the green flag. I don't really watch James Bond movies. I hope what I just said even makes sense, but Chase Elliott gets the last laugh. He moves on to the next round of the playoffs. Points will reset. We'll look at those in a second. Kevin Harvick, after that wreck, is eliminated. The villain was defeated today. I can't say it any other way. Even if you're a big Kevin Harvick fan, after Bristol, you could make an argument that Elliott was in the wrong, Harvick was in the wrong. It was at least debatable, but after what played out in the early portions of today's race with Harvick wrecking Chase Elliott on purpose, it was clear at that point the 4 was the villain, the 9 was the hero. and the heroes won today. The good guys were victorious, just like a Hollywood movie. You know, the more I think about it, Chase Elliott maybe fits the anti-hero mold a little better, you know, because he did get some help today from the powers that be. NASCAR choosing to not black flag him for the rear bumper cover flying off in the wind for 3 or 4 laps was surprising. You know, I don't think that was necessarily NASCAR playing favoritism towards Chase Elliott because he's Chase Elliott, he's the most popular driver and everything. I personally believe if any playoff driver was in the same position Chase Elliott was in right there, like if any other playoff driver had been through all the drama with Harvick, had been intentionally wrecked by Harvick early in the race and was still battling for a playoff spot, I think NASCAR would have made the same non-call that they made for Chase Elliott today. But still, that being said, that was a little frustrating. Chase Elliott probably should have been black flagged for that rear bumper cover. It's a lame rule. I don't always love NASCAR black flagging teams for that kind of thing, but I also understand it's a safety concern because you saw when that piece did fly off the back of the car, it flew up through the air. It's a big heavy piece of, you know, sheet metal. It could hurt somebody potentially, so I understand why the black flag rule is in place, but at the same time, I do not envy NASCAR race control's position right there because you hate to end a guy's season potentially because of a loose bumper cover. You know, Chase Elliott's team didn't ask for that part to be loose. Kevin Harvick made that part loose. So I understand NASCAR race control did not want to get involved in that situation, but that was not a consistent call on their behalf. I mean, NASCAR race control continues to be consistently inconsistent, as we like to say. That was a bit frustrating. So Chase Elliott, maybe the hero, but you could argue the anti-hero because he did get a little help from NASCAR there. That was surprising. I want to move away from that real quick. Let's look at the top finishers from today's race. Shout out to Tyler Reddick and Chris Buescher. For a moment there, I thought Reddick had something for Kyle Larson. He stayed close to him in the final few laps, but he didn't have the speed to get by Kyle Larson. But Chris Buescher also with the top 3. Good job for those 2 drivers. That's awesome. Kyle Busch, who had finished 30th or worse in the last 3 Roval races, gets a top 5. Huge for him. He came in close to the cut line as well, so he moves on. Denny Hamlin, of course, the top 5, the JGR cars. Outside of Truex. Truex surprisingly was a little off today, and he's usually good at road courses. You see Christopher Bell, despite a speeding penalty early on, he finishes inside the top 10, not enough to advance. Same for Alex Bowman, who I mentioned battled electrical issues, kind of similar to Larson's deal. He came back to finish inside the top 10, so a lot of credit to him, but it wasn't enough, unfortunately. Byron put on a show in the second half of this race, man. The strategy got him out front, got him the track position. They were going for the win. That was clear. They needed to win to move on today, and he was fast. He was great, but in the closing laps, he was behind Reddick, behind Larson, and he threw a Hail Mary. As the broadcast mentioned, he was throwing Hail Marys, sliding the tires a little too much in some of the corners, and at one point he got a little too off track and hit the wall, spun out, and that cost him a top 10. He ends up finishing in 11th place, but respect to William Byron. He was really strong today. He was a top 2 or top 3 driver in car all day long, so they almost did everything right to move on past this round, so just wanted to give him some credit. Despite the rear end of his car being quite mangled, Chase Elliott gets a 12th place finish. Great result, great comeback for the 9 team, but those are your top finishers here today. Now let's switch things up. Let's look at the playoff grid as we head to the round of 8, beginning with Texas next weekend. 4 more drivers are out. Alex Bowman, William Byron, Christopher Bell, and of course Kevin Harvick are out. Brad Keselowski survives by just this much. Martin Truex Jr. barely survived today. Like I said, they struggled today. They just did not have the speed that the rest of the JGR cars had, and that was weird. That was strange. That's got me a little concerned because he was my championship pick. I know there's no more road courses in the playoffs, but where did the speed go? Where did the handling go today? I have no idea. He had Cole Pern back as a spotter. I thought that would help. Anyway, the points reset. As you can see, Kyle Larson once again has a massive points cushion over really just about everyone. Martin Truex Jr. now moves back up towards the top thanks to his all the wins he got in the regular season and actually won earlier these playoffs. Larson, Hamlin, Truex, Blaney, the top 4 above the cut line currently. Meanwhile, Busch, Elliott, Logano, Keselowski are the first 4 out, but it's pretty tight. When you exclude Kyle Larson, it's pretty tight, and as we saw this round, 1, maybe 2 bad races for Kyle Larson, or just 2 not good races, 15th place runs or finishes could derail Kyle Larson or could put him in a vulnerable position. So going to be a good reason to watch the next few weeks, even though it's Texas and Kansas back-to-back, kind of racetracks, but you got Martinsville to wrap this next round up, so that's going to be a beautiful bow on top of this Christmas present. We'll talk about the playoffs more later this week. Lastly, let's put this race on the groovy gauge. This thing is always following me. I just can't get rid of it. Charlotte Roval once again lives up to the hype. I love it being a playoff race. Being a playoff cutoff race has always proved to be dramatic as well, but 4 years now, 4 fantastic races, or at least 3. 2018, 2019, and 2021 have all 3 been all-time classic races that continue to be referred to today, races that will continue to be referred to years from now. I don't know what more you can ask for. You had the dramatic storyline between Harvick and Elliott with, in my opinion at least, the good guy coming out on top. Kyle Larson facing adversity early on for a brief instant. I think Hendrick fans were nervous. Was Kyle Larson about to get eliminated in the second round? Whoa, shocking, stunner. But they bounced back in a big way and not only finished in the top 10, won the race. My gosh, the ultimate triumph. You had differing strategies. You had a great battle at the end of stage 1 between Chase Elliott and AJ Allmendinger, who unfortunately wasn't a factor towards the end of this race. So this race had it all. Drivers on the edge of control, small incidents here and there. The playoff picture was in play from start to finish to literally the very end. It was still in question. I thought it was a great race. I thought it was a lot of fun. The controversy around the non-call with Chase Elliott, black flagging him potentially, or waiting for the caution to come out, that was very questionable. That was unfortunate. I think NASCAR obviously made a different judgment call than precedent would suggest they make in that situation. But the on-track action throughout was phenomenal. So I'm going to give this race a 95% on the groovy gauge. Nearly a perfect score. That one little awkward thing with Chase Elliott and the inconsistent call from NASCAR frustrates me a little bit. And I guess if I'm going to nitpick, I'm still not a huge fan of, Harvick and Elliott continuing to trade blows. This incident better be over. Like, this rivalry should be done. If Chase Elliott goes out there and runs into Harvick again, Chase Elliott will be wrong. If Harvick goes out there and runs into Elliott again on purpose, he would absolutely be wrong. This rivalry should be done. I didn't love the radio communication between Elliott and his team. I didn't love what Harvick did on the racetrack. So I can't put that against this race too much. But again, if I'm nitpicking just a little bit, sometimes NASCAR dips into, comical a little too much. Love the passion, love the tempers, but sometimes it gets a little absurd. And we almost dipped into that today. Still, fantastic race, nearly a perfect score, 95% for me on the groovy gauge. Leave your comments down below. What do you think of the Bank of America Roval 400? But again, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks for sticking with me while I'm out here on the road. I'll be back in my typical studio tomorrow, later this week, so we'll have a lot more to talk about before the round of 8 gets kicked off. There was a lot of news today and yesterday. We'll catch up on all that later this week. Thanks for watching, y'all. I appreciate the support. Be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. We talk NASCAR day in, day out. News, rumors, race reactions, previews, and much, much more. And as always, a huge thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters. I couldn't do this show without your tremendous support each and every month. Like I said, I know there's a lot of news out there right now. Not sure if I'll get to them tomorrow. I'll be traveling tomorrow, but Tuesday for sure, we will have a lot to discuss. I appreciate the support, you guys. Hope you enjoyed the race today. Hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll see you in the next one.